What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of At a Glance, the series in which I give you an appetizer, sampler, glimpse into a particular faction in 40k. And the goal behind it is to help you decide if you want to look further into that force on your own, or maybe even start collecting that force as well. So up on the chopping block by viewer request is the Death Korps of Krieg regiment. The request was to do some Imperial Guard stuff, just in general. So here's an Imperial Guard regiment world in an at a glance. And that's how I'm going to be doing Imperial Guard and at a glances, should I get to more in the future, which I plan to over time, is not talk about a specific regiment, because there's infantry regiments, tank regiments, siege regiments, mortar regiments, and so on. And there's countless of each type of regiment from all the different regimental worlds. Each regimental world produces thousands of regiments. So talking about an individual regiment is pointless. Instead, I'm going to go over the core demeanor and viewpoint and philosophy or personality, whatever you want to call it, of the regimental groups in its entirety, the regimental world that they come from, essentially. So that's how I'm going to talk about the Death Korps of Krieg. Now, right off the bat, you probably have a hint about what's going to be going on with the Death Korps of Krieg by their name, Death Korps of Krieg. So, a little bit of history real quick on the planet Krieg. In the past, it tried to declare independence from the Imperium. The loyalists on the world did not take too kindly to that, and a century-spanning civil war of close to 500 years or so erupted. Yes, a civil war that lasted for around 500 years. This is 40k, everything's over the top. But that's not enough. This was a civil war of nuclear fire. Atomic, post-apocalyptic, wasteland situation after the end of the Civil War, because throughout that 500-year Civil War, nuclear weapons were brought to bear all throughout it. So you have, at the end of it, the world brought back into the fold of the Imperium, but it's a blasted post-apocalyptic nuclear wasteland ruinscape of a world on the surface. So the survivors, the people who still live on the planet, had to dig down deep, literally, and live underground in order to survive. A very grim world. The only thing they have that's worth anything is their people. So they become a dedicated regimental world. The only thing that they produce is an army of regiments of the Death Korps of Krieg. And this Civil War, and how the Loyalists fought the Civil War, really affected the situation of the Death Korps of Krieg regiments in terms of their philosophy, their structure, and how they do things. Chief among that is sacrificing for the Emperor, basically self-sacrifice. The willingness to die in battle and march straight into the meat grinder without flinching or hesitating is chief amongst the Death Korps of Krieg's philosophy. The sins of the planet's past sit heavily on their shoulders, and they're ever eager and zealous to prove their loyalty to the Emperor. And they view chief among that in basically dying in droves without any hesitation. That meat grinder attrition style of warfare is basically what they suited themselves to. They are really proficient in siege warfare. That's what they train primarily for. That's typically where casualty and attrition rates are the highest. And whenever possible, the Death Korps of Krieg always request the most dangerous of posts to go to. Whenever they're mustering for a campaign, they want the most dangerous one, by choice, if they can. And they're most often utilized for that because of the really low chance that the army will try and break and flee the situation. The Death Korps of Krieg won't do that, by and large, basically ever, because the whole point of them doing this is to prove their loyalty of their world and their people. The last thing they want to do is fail on that and try and run away. So you have a force immensely suited to the meat grinder, slow and steady pace of attritional siege warfare, and digging in deep for defense as well. So that's kind of the way all the Krieg regiments are, whether it's tank regiments, siege regiments, infantry regiments, and so on. This has led not only to their demeanor being one that's kind of creepy to other regiments, but also having some key differences in their structure. So the first thing I mentioned, how they kind of creep out the other regiments, is their viewpoint, their demeanor. They don't do anything ornate. They don't deal in medals or praising their soldiers. Duty is, this is viewed as a duty, something that you're supposed to do. So why get praised for something you have to do? This is what you do. Their officers are the same way. They don't really have any ornate stuff at all on them. They don't use names, they use numbers. Even their officers, for the most part, use their numbers. They may have names, and they do have names, and maybe that is used, for the Imperium at large. But amongst themselves, that is Colonel 127. He is the colonel of the 127th Regiment. That's how he's addressed, and that's how he refers to himself and everything. So, very much dehumanizes the basic soldier in the Krieg regiments. Doesn't sit well with a lot of other regiments. Plus, their willingness to just die in battle and their tactics that surround that also doesn't sit well with many other regiments. So, it just brings up some operational differences that can kind of impact the campaign if the Imperium isn't careful where they send the Death Korps of Krieg alongside other forces. So with that, there are 3 specific things I want to mention within the structure of the Death Korps of Krieg. Firstly, the Grenadiers. Grenadiers are considered like veterans of the Krieg, but it's a temporary position that you are appointed to and you cannot turn it down at all. And they have no higher rank, technically, than the regular guardsmen, but they're viewed a bit higher by the regular guardsmen as these veterans. They are armored in heavier armor, carapace armor, and they fight where the fighting's thickest. They have the highest attrition rate, around 80% death rate on missions. So 8 out of every 10 Death Korps of Krieg Grenadier will die in battle. So if you happen to survive your time as a Grenadier, you will often go back to your infantry platoon, but the chances of that happening are very slim. And they accept that willingly. I just want to bring that up because it's worth noting, and I bring that up because when I talk about collecting them very briefly, I'll make mention of it again. The second thing I want to make mention of is commissars. Like every Imperial Guard regiment, they have commissars. The commissars are the only off-world force within the Krieg regiments. Everything else is a Krieg native. No Ogrins or Ratlings to speak of, no Psychers to speak of, so the only thing that's not Krieg is a commissar. Now, it's still a commissar. It looks like it's part of the Death Korps of Krieg with the rebreather and everything because it is, and he has to or she has to be because they go into a hostile situation, so they have to have the same gear, but they're not from Krieg. This is important for 2 reasons. Well, one big reason. The Death Korps of Krieg commissars act as liaisons between the regiment and non-Krieg regiments, because they know how to talk and carry themselves better than the Krieg officers do and how to get the point across and actually work well with others, which is kind of a funny thought when you think about the fact that it's a commissar doing that. The second thing is, while the commissar still has his primary role of being a commissar, more often than not, however, the commissar has to pull a 180 and restrain the zeal of the Death Korps of Krieg regiments, basically reminding the officer, saying something like, obviously not like this, but basically going, whoa, stop, time out, the hill is great to get, but the main objective is the city beyond that hill, so let's not send wave after wave to die on this hill needlessly. Let's think about this, take it efficiently, and then we have more strength for the city. They have to kind of rein in the exact thing that the commissars and other regiments are trying to get out of the squads they're a part of. And I find that pretty funny. So, just worth noting. And the last thing I want to mention is a Quartermaster. The Quartermaster is kind of like the medic of other regiments. And by kind of like, I mean that's where he kind of fits the role in. But that's about it. And this stems from the Civil War time period on Krieg. Instead of being a medic and really trying to save the lives of the soldiers, the Quartermaster, more often than not, is going to put the soldier out of its misery and reclaim the war gear for the regiment. Basically, if your wounds are too severe and it'll take too much time and too much energy to treat, you get killed. Granted the Emperor's peace, and your equipment is taken back and utilized for the regiment that can still be used. If your gun's been shattered, they're not going to take it back, but if you have grenades you haven't used yet or whatever the case is, they take it all back to the regiment. That's how they operate again, very much your personal life does not matter. You are a tool in the war machine of the Emperor, no better than a las gun essentially. And since you are now broken as a tool, we're going to take the other tools and give it to the other infantry so they can make use of it. A very grim outlook on how to do things. It's not that they don't treat wounds, just that when it becomes too much of a hassle to treat a wound, they don't. It's a fine line. It's not like, oh, you got a tummy ache, cap you in the head, or oh, you broke your leg and your arm, cap you in the head. It's more like you've been shot several times and it's not worth trying to bring you back, cap you in the head. That's more like it, and then take your stuff back to the regiment. This comes from the Civil War because equipment was at more of a premium then than it is now with the regiments, but it still helps keep the war machine and material moving. So with that said, in terms of collecting the Death Korps of Krieg, the big pitfall is their Forge World models, basically Forge World exclusive stuff. Their rules are in the Siege of Rax books, and now it's just one book, and that's where their updated army list is. And while it's great and all, because if you really want to represent them 100%, you can. However, most campaigns, leagues, and tournaments won't allow that, so you need to utilize the Imperial Guard Codex, the Astra Militarum Codex from GW. And on top of that, all of their models are from Forge World. Now, their models look great. I'm a big fan of anything with long coats, so it looks awesome. But it is from Forge World, meaning if you're not close enough to a Games Workshop store that can order it for you and get it shipped to them, you have to get it shipped to yourself. And either way, it's going to take time. A bit longer to get the models, it's going to be a bit more expensive, but they look great. Now, there are tank upgrades, not really necessary unless you really want to pimp out a tank. You can just buy the normal tanks from GW, the Chimeras and all that, it'll work just fine. But all the infantry you basically have to get from Forge World unless you're good at converting and green stuff sculpting and all that. Then you can maybe make up stuff on your own and have it look equally awesome. But that is not always the easiest thing to do, especially if you're newer into collecting models. So Forge World is going to be basically the way to go to collect these guys. And they do look very cool. I really like how they look. With that said, Codex-wise, it's going to be the Astra Militarum Codex for sure. Now, I mentioned Grenadiers before. I'm mentioning them again. Whatever way you want to represent your 4+ armor-save infantry is how you're going to represent your Grenadiers. Now, yes, maybe one squad or something like that doesn't really make sense to do it as, but hey, you have to fit it within the confines of a codex. So whatever works for you is whatever's going to work. It is your army after all. As long as it looks the part of Death Korps of Krieg, who cares if it's a squad that doesn't really fit in with the Grenadiers' philosophy too much. It fits in with their war gear essentially, and you can run it like that philosophy, no problem. One thing I will make mention of is the Taurox Prime. Now, I don't know how good it is in the meta or anything, but the Taurox vehicle looks really cool. It just looks like it belongs with the Krieg regiment. So, if anything, I would say take one in your Krieg force. It just looks like it belongs. So, anyways, that's really it for the Death Korps of Krieg regiments. They're really cool visually if you like that look, which I do, and I do enjoy their fluff as well. So if you like this idea of a nameless, faceless Imperial Guard regiment force that is all about the meat grinder situation, basically that gun line that slowly advances over time and gradually grinds the enemy to dust, then this force might be the one for you. Its biggest drawback is that most of the stuff has to come from Forge World unless you're good at scratch building, green stuff sculpting, converting stuff on your own. If you are, then you can probably make do without purchasing too much from Forge World. I will say, on the flip side, Forge World models do look really good though. So with that said, that's basically it. Thanks for sticking through it, and if you have any other questions, comments, or requests, leave them in the comments section. And until next time, take it easy.